What's cracking, big dogs? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the HQ. I am Nicholas. This is Big Dogs Gotta Eat BDGE Fantasy Football. Welcome to the channel if you are new. Welcome back if you are a subscriber already. All I ask is that you smash that thumbs up button if you enjoy the video. It is Monday, July 1st. Every single day, 5 days a week, the videos go live at 5 a.m. Eastern time. But since it's July 1st, the Big Dogs Draft Guide is officially going live today. 12 p.m. Eastern time. I know y'all can't wait to get your fingertips on it, but you gotta wait a few hours if you're watching this prior to noon. If you haven't copped the Big Dogs Draft Guide yet, I don't know what the fuck is you doing. It's got every single thing you need for your 2019 fantasy football season. The top 250 big board, positional rankings by tiers, all the top sleepers, the top busts, the do not draft list, the must draft players, going round by round, one player that you need to draft in each round. We've added in some incredible tools this year: the market share tool, red zone, 10 zone, goal line, regular receiving and rushing, consistency charts, key offseason additions for all NFL teams through the draft, through free agency, through trades. This is completely interactive. There are videos, there are links, accessible via laptop, phone, tablet. It will be updated weekly, if not daily, so it will stay tuned throughout the entire summer. No matter when you buy, you'll have access to everything. It will continuously update, not like them magazines in 7-Eleven, and a million other exclusive articles like my top 15 resources, websites, apps that I use for my personal research. We call that the How to Become the GOAT article. And that's an exclusive in the draft guide. It'll tell you about all the good players this year in fantasy football, but it teaches you how to be a better fantasy football player. And that's something that you don't get in other draft guides. I'm not worried about making you a margarita. I'm worried about teaching you how to make a margarita so you can keep that buzz going all summer 19. Go check it out, bigdogsdraftguide.com, live today at 12 p.m. Eastern time, July 1st. We're going to talk about some mid-round wide receivers. A few guys that I feel like keep getting bundled in the same tier or the same category together that I've gotten a lot of questions about and a lot of comments. They would like for me to break these guys down. And in particular, I'm referring to Calvin Ridley, Mike Williams, and DJ Moore. Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore entering their sophomore seasons. Mike Williams will be technically entering his third year. He missed most of his entire rookie season with the back injury. So we're going to break these guys down. What are my thoughts for them in 2019 fantasy football? Their ADPs, where they're being drafted. Would I draft them there? Are they targets? Are they players to avoid? It's all in here. It's going to be a good episode for y'all. As always, we bring the big facts. We bring the noise. So tuck your shirts in. Stop yelling. Hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And let's eat. Alright, so we're going to go in order of their ADP right now on FFPC redraft leagues, so high-stakes season-long leagues. And all three of these guys about a month or two ago were going 10 spots, if not a full round, a round and a half later than they are right now. DJ Moore is the first wide receiver off the board in FFPC drafts. He is the 22nd wide receiver being picked in redraft leagues, 57th overall. Now, it's really easy to, fall in love with DJ Moore, the player, to love him as a prospect and as a football player, right? In the NFL, it's a lot harder to fall in love with DJ Moore's fantasy situation in 2019, particularly. We're not talking about dynasty right now. Everyone likes DJ Moore for dynasty. That's not a hot take, but for season long, for 2019, you got to look at the big facts, and we're here to break down the pros, the cons, play devil's advocate, even to the guys that I really like, and DJ Moore is one of them. And almost all of his situation has to do with Cam Newton being his quarterback, right? It's kind of twofold because, one, you have the people that are just staying away from Cam because of his shoulder injury. Now, he's had a lot more time to recover from this shoulder surgery that he had in the offseason than the prior one, which really cost him a lot moving forward after that initial surgery. He's had a lot more time to recover. He's already throwing full-size balls, and he should be ready for the beginning of the season. He's ahead of his timetable last time. So, the shoulder surgery, I'm not saying it's going to be 100% successful, because that's a risk that you're taking when you're taking any of the Carolina Panthers in the passing game, as well as Cam. So the first concern is whether or not Cam's shoulder is really ready to go and whether or not it holds up for the entire 2019 season, right? So you have that one. Then, if the shoulder is okay, you're still dealing with the fact that Cam Newton is a wildly inaccurate passing quarterback, right? A lot of times, people get excited about players from a fantasy perspective and don't think about things from a real life perspective. You think, oh, if Cam finishes as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, then that means DJ Moore probably had to eat. It's like, no, because he adds so much to the rushing game. And the reason I bring this up is because on Friday's video, or one of the videos last week, I put up a screenshot of the Vegas odds, right? Vegas released last weekend their odds for rushing, receiving, and passing leaders in terms of yardage for the 2019 upcoming season. And a lot of people will be like, Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara have great value on their odds. You're falling more in love with those guys as fantasy players than you are. Like, there's no shot that Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey are going to lead the league in rushing when they're barely topping 200 carries. They're going to have the most they might have the most yards from scrimmage, but just straight rushing yards when you're only getting above 200 carries, when there are other guys that are going to get 300, 350, 400 carries on a good year. So, when you think of players, and just because their fantasy value shoots up because they're good all-around players, right? They stuff the stat sheet with rushing, with passing, with receiving, whatever. Doesn't mean they're particularly good at being their own niche position, right? Like Christian McCaffrey's not going to run for 1,400 yards because he'll have to average 6.5 yards per carry, which is not going to happen. So anyways, back to Cam Newton. His Pro Football Focus grade as a passing quarterback is consistently terrible, right? He had that MVP season back in 2015 when he was the 5th highest graded passer in the NFL. Outside of that, he has never in his career been inside the top 15, and his average in his 8-year career from PFF, including that MVP season, is 22nd overall in PFF grading, which is pretty good. I don't normally use PFF grading for a lot of things, but I think their quarterback rating is pretty good because there's not many variables to it when it comes to passing. It's like accurate or not accurate, And last year, in a year where Cam Newton's adjusted completion percentage was 78%, that was the highest of his career. 78% adjusted completion percentage, which accounts for spikes, drop passes, throwaways, things like that. He had never gone above 72.5%. Last year was 78%. DJ Moore's catchable target rate ranked 40th among wide receivers, and his target quality rating per player profiler was 83rd, while his average target distance was 86th. So let's put that all together, right? So I'm not just spewing numbers out at you. So his average target distance was 86th. Right, the target distance that of the throws that he was getting was 86, meaning he was not getting long balls, he was not getting a lot of shots downfield, and still his quality target rating was 83rd. So the fact that he was getting short passes, but they were wildly inaccurate in a year that Cam was as accurate as he's ever been, right? And the problem is, like, do we see positive regression from Cam Newton, right? Do we see him take a step up in the accuracy column? That's very hard to say because we have a very substantial sample size of Cam Newton just being wildly inaccurate and not, improving on his accuracy. And now with the second shoulder surgery, it's like very hard to be confident in him being a more accurate passer. So Cam being the quarterback makes me very, 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 very nervous. But there are positives, right? Coming off his rookie year, DJ Moore, by all accounts, didn't have an amazing rookie year, but he had a very, very, very solid rookie year that you can absolutely build on and see a breakout coming afterwards. 82 targets, he caught 55 of them, 788 receiving yards, plus 172 yards on the ground. So they used him a lot in the rushing game. Problem was he only scored 2 touchdowns. If he had scored more touchdowns, we'd probably be looking at him in a much higher tier than we are. So overall, he was very close to 1,000 total yards from scrimmage in his rookie year, about 950, 960. If Moore was in a different offense with a different quarterback who was more accurate or not hurt, I'd be all in on a sophomore breakout. But again, there is some good here, right? He didn't play much of the first half of the year. So 1,000 yards from scrimmage, despite not playing much in the first half of the year, is very impressive, right? He didn't hit 50% of the team's snaps in a single game until week 8. And then from then on was a near every snap player for them, playing on 87% of the team's snaps from week 8 till the end of the season. Over his final 7 games, he saw 7 or more targets in every one of them except one, and was getting at least 1 rushing attempt in all of those games, which is not really like a sticking point, not something I'd usually argue for, but when you're averaging about 13 yards per carry, they know how to use them, they know how to get them in space. It's a nice little boost to your fantasy floor. So if you're only getting, 60, 65 receiving yards, you can actually bank on like 80 yards from scrimmage, which is, a nice boost to your bottom line when it comes to fantasy football. And over those last 7 weeks, he was the wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues in fantasy, despite scoring just 1 touchdown over those 7 weeks. So if he had scored 2 touchdowns, he's jumping up from wide receiver 23 to a top 20 fantasy wide receiver, and we're probably looking at him differently. And like I said, like, he scored 2 touchdowns, but we know that touchdowns for wide receivers are extremely volatile year over year, right? I mean, there are a few guys you could probably project to be very steady, like very, very few, like Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins. The rest of them, wildly inconsistent. Like Mike Evans would fluctuate from 10 to 4 to 13 to 5, and that's just like a consistent thing, right? Julio, too, had 8 last year. He had a career high, back in like 2013, but otherwise it's like 4, 6, 8, and you never know what you're going to get. So coming off of a year where he had 2 touchdowns, I would expect a big spike in TDs for DJ Moore, given the volume that he's probably going to get. And the other thing was, like, Moore, I was looking at his red zone targets. Like, why didn't he score? Was he not involved down by the red zone, down by the end zone? He was really not using the red zone last year, at least for the first, 3 quarters of the year. He had just 8 total red zone targets on the entire season last year, but 7 of those 8 came in December, over the last month of the season. So if you're pacing that out, 7 red zone targets in 1 month is very high volume, and it seemed like they started clicking. I know a lot of them didn't capitalize and become touchdowns, but the fact that Cam started trusting him more in the red zone and near the end zone towards the end of the year was good to see. Normally, like, the red zone leader in terms of targets is around like 30 to 35. So if you're pacing that out, 7 red zone targets over the month of the season, you could do the math. He'll be pretty high up there in terms of NFL ranking. But there are definitely some questions as to who is the actual number 1 weapon here. Now, wide receiver, I know people are getting cute with Curtis Samuel and whatnot, but DJ Moore is a wide receiver 1 here in Carolina. There's no question in my mind. Christian McCaffrey is there. I have zero confidence. If you're going to bring up Greg Olsen, please don't waste your time in the comments. Any of these guys that are like 35 years old, coming off serious leg, foot, toe, ankle injuries, get them off your draft board, please. I have zero confidence Greg Olsen will make an impact on DJ Moore's bottom line. I think DJ Moore will out-target Christian McCaffrey this year. As I mentioned before, right, Cam's adjusted completion percentage of 78% was the highest in his career. However, that came at the cost of having a much lower average depth of throw. His average depth of throw in terms of like target distance was 7.6, which was also by far and away the lowest of his career. So he sacrificed distance on his throws for more accurate throws, and that's what led to so many dump-offs to Christian McCaffrey and even DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and things like that. I think that spoke to the shoulder. I don't think the shoulder was ever fully healthy going into the season and throughout the rest of the season, right? And it led to him not taking a lot of shots downfield, and he probably felt like he can only be accurate over the short part of the field that was right in front of him, right? So I think we'll definitely see a lot more of those numbers come back to the norm, more distance throws down the field, and probably a little less accurate overall when you look at the end of season numbers, but I think that's good for DJ Moore. And DJ Moore, even if he gets a lot of short targets, he is fantastic after the catch. His 55 reception total last year ranked 42nd among NFL wide receivers, but he ranked 13th in total yards after the catch in terms of the entirety of the yards that he produced after the catch. So 13th on 42nd in terms of receptions. That is very, very efficient. He's an explosive playmaker after the catch. It's something that we knew about him coming out of Maryland, coming out of college as a prospect. Now, I think Moore will have his big games, but he might be a nightmare in season-long leagues between the erratic accuracy and choosing between games where him and Christian McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel all kind of explode and have their share of big games. I think we'll see Moore finish as a wide receiver 2, somewhere in that like wide receiver 20 to 24 range, which is great. But I think people are going to start drafting him as if the breakout is here, right? As if, he'll probably hit the top 15 to top 12 wide receivers this year. And I think like top 15 is probably in his range of outcomes. But I think a lot of that goes back to his love stemming from dynasty leagues. Each year, people get more and more into dynasty fantasy football, and the analysis is twofold, threefold, exponential, right? You're hearing so much buzz around every single player, and a lot of it for DJ Moore is based around dynasty. So don't confuse dynasty with redraft, right? You have to understand that when you're listening to people talk about dynasty, those guys get a lot of leeway because they could say like, "Oh, I love DJ Moore," and they don't have to suffer any repercussions if he has a down year in the following year because they're like, "Oh, it's dynasty. I'm looking at the long term." You know what I mean? And I think that's my issue with DJ Moore, is that I'm a little nervous about his 2019 season, given what I just kind of laid out for you. Although I love him as a prospect, like everything about him as a prospect says that he will be a very successful NFL wide receiver. But I'm a little bit nervous that, if his ADP keeps creeping up, he's 52 overall, which is the beginning of the 5th round. If that creeps up into the 4th round, DJ Moore will probably be someone that I will not get on a majority of my teams. But I would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on DJ Moore. Is he someone you're targeting a redraft at his current price, the back end of the fourth, the early fifth round? It's a little too steep for me. If he was still going in like the sixth or seventh round where he was in the beginning of the offseason, I would kind of be all on board for that. And I really think that he is going to be a dynamite dynasty player. But let me know what your thoughts for DJ Moore in redraft leagues. Drop that comment down below. While you're down there, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you are new, of course. And let's move on to numero dos. Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons. My Atlanta Falcons. That was a good slap. Woo! Titties are electric today. He's going right behind DJ Moore. So DJ Moore was the 22nd wide receiver off the board. Calvin Ridley is the 23rd wide receiver off the board. 59th overall, so he's in the middle of the fifth round pretty much. Calvin Ridley is just the fourth wide receiver to catch double-digit touchdowns during his rookie season since 2000. Now, Randy Moss did it in 1998, I know, and a few guys have done it over the previous 50, 40, 30, 60 years, whatever. But since 2000, in the modern era, we've only had 4 guys do it, including Calvin Ridley. That was Mike Evans and Odell, who both did it in 2014, and that was Mike Williams, not of the Chargers, of Tampa Bay, back in the day, in 2010, he caught 11 touchdowns. So Ridley finished his rookie year with a very impressive stat line. 64 catches, 92 targets, 821 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns. An all-around just fantastic rookie year for a wideout by all accounts. We know how fantastic Calvin Ridley is as a route runner. And you better be when you come into the NFL as a 23-and-a-half-year-old prospect or 23-and-a-half-year-old rookie, compared to some of the guys like N'Keal Harry coming in at 21 years old. So you have 2.5 more years to develop as a wide receiver and become a better route runner. So if you're an old wide receiver and you're not a good route runner, that is a glaring red flag. But we look at Calvin Ridley's reception perception, and this is done by Matt Harmon of Yahoo, and the entire reception perception breakdown is in the Fantasy Footballers Ultimate Draft Kit. You grab their draft kit after you grab mine. They're dynamite duo tools together. Calvin Ridley's rookie year. 76.2% success rate versus man coverage, 93rd percentile, 78.6% success rate versus press coverage in the 90th percentile. And you could look at the routes, I'll leave them up for a little bit, but he was awesome down the field. He was awesome against press coverage, against man coverage, and those are things that only improve year over year. You see the top guys like Antonio Brown, Stephon Diggs, consistently up here in those percentile ranges for man versus press coverage. And that's great to see from Calvin Ridley. So he not only did it in college, but he backed it up by doing it on the NFL field. The consistency, though, is definitely a concern. He had the 3-game stretch in the beginning of 2018 from weeks 2 to 4 that really put him on the map. 3 games, weeks 2 to 4, he caught 6 of his total 10 touchdowns during those 3 games. And although 3 games of the NFL season makes up 18%, right? 3 of 16 games makes up 18% of your season. Those 3 games accounted for 32% of Ridley's receiving yards, 40% of his touchdowns, and 41% of his fantasy production last year. So 41% of his fantasy production came in weeks 2 to 4. You definitely weren't putting him in your lineups in week. You definitely didn't put him in your lineup in week 2 after the week 1 game he had. So you probably missed out on 13% of his production right there. You might have put him in for weeks 3 and 4, kept him in for week 5, and then he was wildly inconsistent after that. From weeks 5 through the rest of the season, Ridley failed to hit 48 receiving yards in 9 of the remaining 12 games. He pretty much gave you a dud in almost all the games afterwards. He scored a touchdown in just 1 of those 9 games. So in 8 games, he was basically useless. And that doesn't include week 1, where he was kind of useless as well. I will say, though, Ridley is probably my favorite wide receiver of the 3 young guys on this list in terms of redraft because of the situation. I mean, yes, Julio Jones is there, but Ridley was able to just put up these numbers in his rookie year with Julio there. Julio just led the NFL in receiving yards and in targets, and Calvin Ridley just did this. And we can also expect the 50-50 target split between Ridley and Mohamed Sanu to start going way more in favor of the sophomore wideout, Calvin Ridley, coming into 2019. So I love his chances to easily top 100 targets, 110 targets. Last year, he saw 92 targets in this offense. He had a 16% target share. Let's keep it reasonable, though. Let's say the 16% target share jumps up to 18%. I think that's very reasonable, seeing as he'll have more snaps and more targets than Mohamed Sanu going into his second year. So 16 to 18%. It's a small but not negligible. I had so much trouble saying that word. Negligible jump. 16 to 18%. We have to look at Dirk Cutter. coming in as the offensive coordinator means a lot of passing. And we could look back at when Dirk Koetter was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons from 2012 to 2014. His 3 years as the OC in Atlanta, 632 pass attempts, 660 pass attempts, 615 pass attempts for the Falcons. Last year in Tampa Bay, 626 pass attempts, 605 the year before. Case in point, we're going north of 600 pass attempts this year in Atlanta as a floor. If we put them at 600 pass attempts, the absolute floor, Ridley sees 18% of the targets. He's hovering around 110 targets on the year. And if it's only going up there, depending on where you want to put the passing volume. If he's closer to 650 pass attempts than 600, and maybe he cracks 19% of the target share, we're looking at 125, 130, 135 targets for Calvin Ridley, and that's going to be a monster fantasy season for him. I think he easily sees north of 110 targets this year. You combine that good volume, that solid number of targets, with his big play threat, right? He was top 10 in the NFL last year in 40-plus yard receptions. Koetter's NFL ranks in terms of deep ball attempts over the last 5 seasons: 4th, 3rd, 8th, 13th, and 6th. The Falcons team is going to pass a lot. Ridley is a great deep threat, right? He has a 4.4 speed. He has extremely good downfield speed. And being on the outside, playing opposite of Julio, we already saw his press and man coverage. Beating press and man coverage is no problem for him. He's in the 90th percentile or above in both of those success rates, which we saw from the reception perception. Ridley's 16 deep targets last year ranked 37th in the NFL, but he caught all 7 of the ones that were deemed catchable. So he had 16 targets downfield. We know he's going to get more targets. We know Dirk Koetter takes as many targets down the field as any OC in the league, if not more so. He caught all 7 that were deemed catchable. He ranked 20th in yards on deep balls, and his 4 deep touchdowns were 6th most in the NFL. So 37th in terms of deep targets, but 4th in terms of, 6th in terms of deep touchdowns, 20th in terms of yards on deep passes. I am absolutely loving what Dirk Koetter is going to do to Calvin Ridley and the connection that Ridley and Matt Ryan are going to have this year. So I'm thinking, like, why can't Calvin Ridley be the Deshaun Jackson here? Why can't he be the Deshaun Jackson of the Tampa Bay offense for the Atlanta Falcons? They brought in 2 first-round offensive linemen this year in the draft. Both excel in pass blocking. That is their strength. They want Matt Ryan to have time. Both first-round guys excel in the pass blocking portion of the game. Look for Matty Ice to continue dropping dimes to Ridley, to Julio. His overall upside is obviously capped, Calvin Ridley's is, because Julio is there. It's hard to imagine him having a top 10 finish in 2019. But guys, last year he finished as the wide receiver 19 overall, wide receiver 23 in points per game. So a small step up in target volume. Wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 18 is absolutely not outside of the range of outcomes. And I think it's probably the most likely range of outcomes for Calvin Ridley. So he's my favorite of these 3. Again, before we move into the third guy, Mike Williams, I want you guys to rank them, redraft. How would you guys rank these 3 players? Just drop a quick comment down below, 1, 2, 3. Who you would draft first, not according to ADP, just straight up, who would you rather have on your team? Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore. I want to know what you guys think. And again, while you're down there, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Mike Williams, Los Angeles Chargers, wide receiver 27 overall, 66th overall. So he's actually about a round later than the first 2 guys. Admittedly, I've never been a fan of Mike Williams as a prospect coming into the NFL, but I will admit his range of outcomes is extremely wide for the 2019 season, which means I could be very wrong. If I'm telling you to fade him, it might be a good idea to draft him everywhere. He did next to nothing in his rookie season because of the back injury that he suffered, but then he broke out last year to the tune of 10 touchdowns on 43 receptions for 664 yards last year. Can't ignore the 10 touchdowns, but just 43 receptions and 664 yards to go along with the 10 touchdowns is interesting, and I think that's what we need to break down. And I know a lot of you guys are going to be like, oh, that's like close to what Calvin Ridley did, but no, it's not. Like, he had 21 more catches and almost 200 more yards, so those 2 are very, very different in terms of the end-of-year statistics. Since the year 2000, this is a deep dive for y'all. Since the year 2000, there have been 159 instances of a player catching 10-plus receiving touchdowns in a season. So going back 18 years, 159 double-digit touchdown seasons from wide receivers. Mike Williams' catch total of 43 reception, ranks 4th lowest among those 159 instances. His yardage total of 664 yards ranks 9th lowest. So he scored 10 touchdowns on very, very, very below average subpar numbers in those other categories. So what's going to happen in 2019? Of those guys, of the 159, 15.6% of them increased their touchdown totals in the next year. So 85% did not, which is actually a much higher number than I expected to see from these guys. 15% increased from double-digit touchdowns the following year. It's pretty good. But the big thing is the average decrease was over 4 touchdowns in the following season. Of the ones that caught 10 touchdowns and were similar to Williams in the fact that they finished with fewer than 800 receiving yards. So of the 159 players that caught double-digit touchdowns, of the ones that did it with 800 receiving yards or fewer, those players saw their touchdown totals fall by an average of almost 8 touchdowns. Only 10% of those ones that had 800 receiving yards or less, only 10% of them stayed within 5 touchdowns of the total that they had during that 10 touchdown year. And this is excluding a word? Excluding, there you go. There we go, Nicky boy. Sorry, it's early in the morning. I haven't finished my coffee. I might chug this bitch right now for y'all. It's really cold. So this is excluding any wide receivers that played in fewer than 12 games the following year. So it's taking out all injured players. It's taking out guys who missed half the season or whatever. So I would say those numbers are pretty solid. Of course, you always have to take it into context. Who's going to be in a situation like Mike Williams? Well, listen here, motherfuckers. If you caught 10 touchdowns in a year, do you think that most of these players were not in a good situation the following year? How many players coming off a 10 touchdown season are put in the doghouse by their coaches? No, they probably saw an increase in playtime. So I know you have to take everything into context, but I think y'all have to take this shit into context in the fact that most of these guys probably got a lot of playtime in the following year. You don't come off a 10 touchdown year and get benched, right? Mike Williams is 24 years old, though. Context. Come on, Nick. Break it down, keep it together. Sorry, I'm very stressed right now because I'm filming this on Friday and I just have so much fucking work to do for the draft guide, and I know you guys are going to love it. If you did cop the draft guide and you explored through it, you browsed through it, and you like what you're seeing so far, I would love some kind of review, whether it's a tweet to me or an email or a comment down below. Anything is very much appreciative. You know, I get anxiety when I have these big launches. Freaks me out a little bit. But back to Mike Williams, back to context. That is the hashtag for this season. Context. He's 24 years old, turning 25 in October. He has top 10 draft capital, and those things matter. They matter. Tyrell Williams is gone. He's seen 64 and 69 targets over the last 2 years, respectively. But they get Hunter Henry back. And Tyrell Williams developed into pretty much exclusively a speedy downfield playmaker for the Chargers. Mike Williams does not have the speed that Tyrell offered, right? Tyrell was a 4.49 guy. Mike Williams is a 4.59 guy, but he's got bigger size, so the weight adjusted speed score is there. He's a solid possession receiver on the outside. And he actually bested Tyrell in average depth of target last year, 15.6 to 13.3. So the majority of his targets were more downfield than Tyrell was, while having a better catch rate, 67.2% to Tyrell's 65.1%. So that's pretty impressive. So it might not fit the typical mold of a deep downfield threat, but he caught all 4 of the catchable deep targets he saw last year. He saw 11 in total, but 7 of them were deemed uncatchable per PFF. The question in mind becomes, though, for me, which hurts or helps Mike Williams more for 2019? Does the departure of Tyrell Williams help Mike Williams more than the return of Hunter Henry hurt him? Williams ranked 3rd in the NFL last year among wide receivers in fantasy points per target, but that was almost exclusively tied to the fact that he had 10 touchdowns. Would I bet he matches that number, 10 touchdowns? No way. I definitely would not. Not with Hunter Henry coming back, because Hunter Henry is going to come back and take a lot of the end zone and red zone targets away, and we saw that when Hunter Henry was healthy, right before his breakout a couple of years ago, and just Antonio Gates' entire career. Philip Rivers targets the tight ends down by the red zone at a ridiculously high rate. Get this, Mike Williams in 2018, his 10 touchdowns, that was the first time ever that Philip Rivers, who's been in the NFL for like 40 years, ever, that a wide receiver caught double-digit touchdowns with Rivers under center. Vincent Jackson came close, but it was always Antonio Gates. If anyone ever hit double digits, it was the tight ends. It was Antonio Gates. That was the first time ever that a wide receiver with Philip Rivers hit double-digit touchdowns. The way I see it, Williams will have to see a big increase in targets and be very good on the deep ball, right? Tyrell Williams' targets, I know everyone's like, Tyrell's gone, Mike Williams is going to get such a big boost up in playtime or whatever. Like 64 and 69 targets is not a massive target increase when you're considering Hunter Henry is coming back and you're considering both Eckler and Melvin Gordon missed 3-4 games each, right? And they get a lot of targets in this offense. I don't know if I see Mike Williams seeing like a 40 to 50 target increase this year, and him being, if you're going to have to take him in the 5th round, like, you need him to be over 100, over 110, 15 targets where like Calvin Ridley's going to be. I don't know if I see that happening. And what I don't hear being talked about enough is the Chargers offense overall. They're still good, right? They're definitely a good offense and above average, but they're low key like taking a very similar approach to what the Saints are doing, right? And what New Orleans is doing, which is to protect their old-ass quarterback, right? Rivers is 37, going on 38 years old. They want him in the pocket for as less clock time as possible, fewer shots downfield, fewer hits, right? They don't want him sitting in the pocket and taking hits, right? So they're getting the ball out quickly. They're trying to protect him, dumping off the running backs, taking short routes as the preferred routes for Phillip Rivers. They want to keep him upright, just like they're doing in New Orleans for Drew Brees, right? There are tons of carries for their running backs. Kamara and Ingram have been super involved. So have Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler since head coach Anthony Lynn has taken over, and a ton of targets to their running back. It's what drops a guy like Michael Thomas down the wide receiver tiers for me in his respective offense. If you missed the wide receiver rankings video a couple weeks ago, go check that out on my channel. For the 4th consecutive season, we've seen Phillip Rivers' pass attempts drop. 4 consecutive years, pass attempts have dropped each year. This previous year, 508 pass attempts. That was his lowest total since 2009, when he had 486 pass attempts. He attempted a deep pass on just 10.6% of his throws last year, which tied for 26th amongst the starting NFL quarterbacks. Williams' snap role should increase in 2019 for sure, although it was a bit concerning for all the hype that he got and all the good plays he made and whatnot. His role did not increase over the second half of 2019. He never supplanted Terrell Williams for that wide receiver 2 role. He might have had some big boost touchdown games that made it seem like he did, but he did not. When you're looking at the snap count numbers outside of week 12, when Tyrell Williams didn't play, look at the other totals. Like week 9, 29% to 92%. Week 10, 46% to 80%. Week 11, 58% to 87%. Then you had week 12 when Tyrell Williams didn't really play. Week 13, 54 to 79%. It's all steady except for that week 15 game when Keenan Allen got hurt, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler were not on that field, right? It's a little concerning that Mike Williams never overtook Tyrell Williams for the wide receiver 2 role. And Williams had a couple of good games in 2019, but they were all completely touchdown fueled. There was that monster 3-touchdown game against Kansas City in week 15, and that's where you saw the snap production spike. But Keenan Allen wasn't on the field. Hunter Henry wasn't on the field. Melvin Gordon wasn't on the field. Austin Eckler weren't on the field. Like, Mike Williams better have fucking gone off that game in a game where they were playing against the Chiefs and they needed to put up 30 points in order to compete. If Mike Williams, the only playmaker left on the field, didn't go off that game, you would have some huge problems. So again, you take everything into context. The year was good, but I feel like a lot of it was, I don't want to say fluky. Putting into context makes you feel like, okay, maybe a lot of that probably wouldn't have happened without all these injuries. So I'm not a fan of Williams. I might try to get him in one of my leagues this year, but not at a 5th round price. I would much rather pay the 6th, 7th round price that he was going in for a while. And if he's not in that range, I probably won't be taking him because I just don't see the target total increasing just solely based off Tyrell Williams' 60 targets going up for grabs in an offense that had so many offensive playmakers out for a large period of time during the 2018 season. So those are my points for these guys. Calvin Ridley is my number 1 guy on this list, closely followed by DJ Moore, who I think will be a little bit more inconsistent, and then Mike Williams. So they're probably a tier gap apart there. But again, I want to hear how you guys have them ranked in redraft leagues for the 2019 fantasy football season. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like the big facts and you're going to be blown away by the big facts that I'm giving y'all in the Big Dogs Draft Guide, make sure you go cop that because it releases today at noon Eastern, July 1st. BigDogsDraftGuide.com. I love you for supporting me. I don't even care if you buy the guide. Any thumbs up, any subscribing to the channel, to the podcast, leaving a rating or review helps me out. Helps me hopefully not be unemployed for the rest of the summer. I love y'all. I'll see you on tomorrow's episode with your boy Noah. I believe it is bold predictions for the 2019 fantasy football season. We out. Goodbye.